Hi, greetings everybody. I believe we've hit the broadcast button now. My name is Dan Winters and I'm the head of Americas with GRESB. A fine good morning to the folks in America on the West Coast, and a good late afternoon to our EU colleagues where it's 5 o'clock in Amsterdam, here in Arlington, Virginia, mid-morning, kind of overcast, hot, humid, muggy, and buggy. Hopefully it doesn't rain while I'm sitting outside. So today, first off, thanks for joining today's webinar, where we're set to discuss GRESB's initial launch of the climate risk platform. And so I think it's important to emphasize that at GRESB, our mission and our objective is to advance the industry, the institutional real estate industry and real asset industry more broadly, and help it advance forward with the issues that are in play as we navigate into a new decade. As I was thinking about coming into this webinar, what 2020 started off for me, right? I ended up at IREI VIP Americas. I was at the PRIA spring meeting, and at each of those big industry conferences, there were, every panel talked about ESG. And the two dominant themes are resilience and climate risk. And that's either physical risk or transition risk. Obviously, that was a pre-COVID conversation. And, I'm getting rumblings from folks that our current situation is almost a trial run or a practice run for climate change and the business impacts that it may have. So we're going to dive in today with a focus on physical risk. So as a quick reminder, on August 1st, the GRESB submissions are due. That's our deadline this year. We've extended it for 1 month to allow for some extra time for folks. So that's coming up right around the corner. There's been a lot of activity in the GRESB portal. So ESG has continued its momentum that we noted to start the year. And, we're seeing early indications point to another solid year of participation in the benchmark. From a housekeeping standpoint, 3 things to offer. Ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom center of your screen. Please stay muted. I'll do the same. You may be hearing some cicadas in the background, and I apologize for that. Marine One goes overhead every now and again. And so, all right. And so all post-webinar questions can also be directed to me, and I'll help navigate to Eric or to our friends at Munich Re. So with that in mind, joining me today, and Eric, you can move to the next one. Joining me today are 3 impressive guests. So first off, we've got Eric Landry, who's in our Amsterdam office. He's with GRESB. He's our climate change specialist. He joined us from MIT, where he's been working on the leading and bleeding edge of climate research. And he brings a tremendous wealth of knowledge. He's going to demonstrate today the portal that we've put together and are offering now with the data with Munich Re. And he's going to discuss how GRESB participants can better understand their asset and portfolio risks. Next, we have 2 great gentlemen from Munich Re. Really happy to have them. So first, we've got Sergey and Dr. Jürgen Schemetchek.
That's correct.
I was working hard on that because, and I want to say this to our audience, the discussion that we had for this webinar was amazing. And to watch Jürgen and Eric go back and forth about, I think this is going to be a great webinar. So with that, let me just turn over now to Sergey. And Sergey, can you say some words from the Munich Re standpoint? Sorry.
Yeah, so great intro, Dan. I really like your nice intro. You have a great garden down there, and I'm really jealous. Yeah, I'm sitting in my office, although I'm actually happy to be back in the office now, because nowadays it's you sometimes see what you've been missing, huh? I'm also very glad and happy that we have the opportunity to join this great webinar. We at Munich Re engaged with GRESB kind of 6 months ago, and the contact came because we have a common client, big Dutch pension fund, with whom we had started doing some climate-related scoring of their assets. And they were quite impressed about the scores and the deep know-how which Munich Re has regarding its 140 years of climate experience. And I mean, you may not forget that climate is our core business. If we wouldn't be doing good in assessing the impact of climate on our business, we would have been out of business. Yeah. So I would say we have a very deep knowledge of climate, but also of climate change. And through this discussion, we came together with with this Dutch client, and they started saying, hey, why don't you just engage with GRESB? I think there would be a much wider platform for many investors who are curious about the impact of climate on their assets. And this is a bit how we came together. So very excited, very happy to be here, and I'll over to you, Dan.
Excellent. Good. Thanks for joining us today. I also want to weave in my colleague, Neil Pegram, who's joining us from Canada. Neil, would you say a couple hellos?
Yeah, as always, Dan, great intro. And I'm just joining in today on some level also to learn. I've been Eric's. We've talked lots in the last couple of months about the development of this, and I'm excited that we're launching it, and great to have the real pros on here who really know the details. So this, of course, we have global coverage on it, and we've been doing the same webinar for other regions. Dan and I kind of cover all of North and South America. So if we have any participants with portfolios in those areas, this is going to be a great advantage to them. So great to be here. Thanks.
Excellent. Good job. All right, Eric, let's turn to you. Let me introduce Eric Landry from our Amsterdam office. And Eric, let's move along and show the folks what we have.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone. Let's just jump right into it. So first, just a quick overview on the agenda. So we're already well into the introduction. Part one, we'll kind of go over climate risk, what we mean by that in the context of the platform that we'll be providing. Then we'll go into a demo of the dashboard and how you can go ahead and use the climate risk platform to go ahead and get the insights that you want and how flexible it is and what benefits that can bring you. Then third, we can just kind of do an overview of the product specifications and some more kind of logistical things so that our assets can get, our asset managers can get started right away. And then after a quick wrap up, we'll dive into a Q&A session, hopefully for around 15 minutes, so that our many attendees online can go ahead and ask whatever style question they want. And then again, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A function of the Zoom meeting. Just again, quickly, that this webinar will be recorded, so don't worry about trying to write everything down really quickly. It will all be there for you later on the GRESB website. So first, we could just go ahead and reiterate you know, how GRESB and Munich Re are really kind of complementary in this in providing this kind of service. So when you report your especially in 2020, when we've started collating asset level information on the GRESB portal, we geolocate all your assets. So that's 100,000 plus on the platform so far. And because we have those geolocations, we can leverage the geospatial climate risk exposure mappings that Munich Re has spent a lot of time developing. And so what that results in is, once you pair these two data sets together, is an easily accessible and asset level aggregated portfolio assessment of physical climate risk exposure. So you can aggregate up to the portfolio level, but more importantly, as we'll see when we start the demo, is how you can go ahead and identify that at the asset level and why that's important, especially when you're considering exposure to climate extremes. So this, I'm sure many of the attendees on the webinar have seen this or a similar figure before. This one, again, is from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And they basically broke climate risk or climate-related risk up to two major categories. The first being transition risks, and the second being physical risks. So transition risk being all of those market and technological risks that come along with the global economy's gradual or perhaps disjointed move towards a low carbon economy. But what we're really going to be focusing on today and the kind of the first product out on the platform is really focused on physical risk. So how does the climate and weather events and extreme weather events and also chronic stresses and changes in like overall weather patterns, how do these affect your portfolios at the asset level? From here, then you can go ahead and with this knowledge and kind of, you know, with this knowledge, then you'll be able to go ahead and do more strategic planning, risk management, assessing, you know, how sensitive certain assets are to the climate risks that they're exposed to. But really the first step is exposure. And I think that we can dig a little more into what that means. So I really like this figure. This is from the Institute for Climate Economics, and it breaks down the elements or the components of, you know, what components make up physical climate risk. And so, you know, they break it up into these categories. The first being climate hazard, the second being exposure. So hazard being what type of hazard, and does it befall a certain point? Exposure being, you know, is it of a specific severity that it oversteps a threshold to which then it becomes actually hazardous, for instance. And then also includes elements of, you know, if a certain hazard is going to touch down with a certain frequency or probability in a given time frame. And then there's also elements of when under physical climate risk of vulnerability. So for a specific asset, how affected might it be to the exposure to climate hazards to which it's exposed. And so vulnerability can also include elements of sensitivity and adaptive capacity. But these really require a lot of information on the asset itself. And so, you know, when you're looking at services, and there are starting to be some that start to touch on these elements, you know, be careful, because that requires a lot of information, because it becomes very, very asset specific at that point. And so if you're doing it at a portfolio level and there are just kind of general weightings out there, make sure you know what those are. For this platform and this offering, we're focused on doing the first half of the equation really well. And so that's what we're going to say. We're going to just, everything in this box, we're just going to say is climate risk exposure at this point. And now I want to just hand it over to Jürgen, so he can talk a little bit more about what the output is going to be in terms of the kind of quantitative numbers that Munich Re will be providing. Jürgen?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and welcome or good morning to the audience. And my name is Jürgen Šimeček, and I hold a PhD in hydrology, and I have over 20 years experience in natural hazard and climate risk assessment and developing risk scoring products for location based services. So my core experience, or I'm currently working on climate risk scores for real estate, banks, pension funds, insurance business. And let me first explain what is really unique on our or on this product. We provide GRESB, a backward looking natural hazard assessment, which means for floods or hurricanes, based on the experience or observation from the past, and in combination with forward-looking climate risk assessments for the projected flood zones and hurricane zones. So this is, from my perspective, so far very unique in the market, to have both options to look into the back or in the history, what is it, how it looked my situation or my exposure today, and how it looks maybe in 50 or in 100 years. So a few words to the output of our modeling activities is basically presented by a full set of 12 backward-looking natural hazards. You see it on the acute hazard on the left side in the slide, and 7 forward-looking climate hazard, including return periods or indices, for example, for flood or hurricane. And what is a return period? A return period takes into account the probability of a certain event above a given threshold. Yeah, for example, wind speed above 100 kilometers of a severity during a given time period. So that you can use directly to turn a hazard into combined with a vulnerability into a risk. And the model results allows a consistent analysis and the comparability. I think this is very important. You can, based on this, you can do analytics, or you can analyze locations on a worldwide scale, distributed, and we have in our system a global consistency. And I think this is the key value to ever evaluate any location worldwide with the same fundamentals. I think this is very important, because regional wise, maybe there are very different products, and it's always very difficult to fit different products together. And you can imagine in a country, and then in a broader scope on a continent or worldwide, it's nearly impossible to use so many sources. And this is what we think most helpful, if you can use a consistent global data set. Eric, I think I hand over to you, back to you. And
Jürgen, I've got a question for you quickly.
Yes,
so
please.
I picked up on our pre-webinar conversation that this is the data that Munich Re uses with their, in their business. Is that true? And can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for our reinsurance business, we use all these acute hazards in our daily business, because we insure primary insurers, and we have to assess all our global portfolios. That means insurance portfolios, and we based on that exposure, we modeled all these exposures, because we have to calculate the budgets and for the scenarios, and an outcome from these modeling activities from our experts is this hazard zoning system for the current situation. And for the future scenarios, I will explain later on our data input or modeling input.
Perfect. Okay, Eric, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, because I think that's such an important point, the fact that you guys use return periods, because some other modeling exercises will go ahead and say, oh, well, relative to the other asset locations in a specific country or in a specific subregion or globally, this is what your risk is relative to other points. But the production of return periods actually puts this into, okay, probability above a certain threshold in a given time frame. That's very quantitative, easier to plug into whatever future analysis you want to put into context in terms of your assets. And so you don't have to try and juggle like, okay, well, is this extreme value for just my country, or is this an extreme value for my global portfolio? That kind of calculus is already done for you. I think that's so important. But yeah, let's go ahead and the moment you've all been waiting for, let's go ahead and take a look at the dashboard. So here we're in my version of the portal, and I set up a demo portfolio that we'll be exploring today. So we're in the GRESB asset portal here, and we're going to click on climate risk. will take us to this essentially a landing page, and there's more information down here, all accessible. Just go ahead and sign up for a GRESB account and take a look at that. But really, let's go ahead and dig into the demo right now. So these are the orders that I put. These are all my different portfolios and all the stuff that I've purchased.
So Eric, I think one thing that's to note here is it's possible to look at an entire portfolio if you've got a portfolio of 70 buildings in a private equity fund, or you can also kind of select a handful or a subset of those, right? Is that what we were seeing?
Absolutely. Yeah, so you can choose to buy data for a single asset, for 2 assets, for 1,000 assets in a particular fund. And then if you do have 1,000 assets in a particular fund, but you want to look at specific property types or whatever, you can mix and match as you see fit. And so we want this, we want this to be as flexible as possible for the asset managers. If they already know what assets of theirs are the most valuable, and they really want to dig into those ones, that's something that we want to allow for. So when you take a look at this dashboard, we'll break it up into 3 main elements or panels. So the first being this exposure overview, then we have the map, then we have the table down here. So first, the exposure overview. Again, so when you're looking at an overview, each one of these is kind of the average exposure score for the assets in a particular, in the portfolio that you're looking at. Now you can scope that down by property type and you can see those averages change as we add more and more assets to the property type listing here. Let's go ahead and reset that so we're looking at all of them. Right now we're looking at, kind of a US-based portfolio. But again, this is a global tool with global coverage. And so we could have this, anywhere over here as well. And then also there's, for those who want to get really granular, you can do filtering by state as well. And so, what's really interesting here is, well, this is great for kind of a portfolio overview, but that doesn't help me really with, identifying my most exposed assets. So what I can go ahead and do is I can go ahead and click on each one of these risk factors and understand immediately, okay, how am I looking in terms of these different risks? And so while there might not be so much differentiation in some risk factors, you see like in river flood, this kind of medium exposure level kind of belies what lies underneath, right? And so here we can see that, a great many of our assets are nowhere near to being exposed from river flood risk, but then there are a few, maybe, a handful that I should be really paying attention to. And this is where it's important to be able to have kind of this capability to dig into specific risks and be able to quickly and easily identify where they are and what they are. So I can click on any one of these. And of course, this is packed with just fake data. And so, the states aren't even necessarily right. But basically, I can click on this demo asset and say, okay, I should be looking at demo 26. And I'll come down here to the table and do a little more in-depth analysis, right? One more thing on the kind of exposure overview that I want to take a look at is this filter up here. So not only can I look at the present kind of exposures, but also exposures for 3 different climate scenarios. So RCP 2.6, RCP 4.5, and 8.5. And then along two different forward-looking timeframes. So 3 in all: present, 2050, and 2100. For those that are kind of new to this type of analysis, the RCPs are the representative concentration pathways, and these are the kind of the profiles of atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases that the IPCC uses in their assessment of reports. The the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. For those of you in the ESG business, you know that there are enough acronyms to go around with SASB and CDSB and all the rest of it. So in any case, here's some more for you. RCPs, those are some important ones that you should remember. And Jürgen can definitely talk more about these in a second. But for instance, earthquakes, the exposure to earthquake is not going to change given different profiles of atmospheric concentration. So only specific risk factors will have values in future years under specific scenarios. And so these would be our selection of forward-looking climate risk scores. And then in the present, we have the most of them because we also have the kind of the backward data there. So quickly moving down to the table, again, extremely flexible. You can have them all. You can have all of the risks for all of the timeframes and everything, and scroll across. But you can also filter this by risk factor. You can filter it by scenario, and you can filter it by time frame. And the fun thing about this is if you wanted to look at a specific scenario, then you can look at that specific scenario across time. So you can look at it for how is it in the present, how is it in 50 years, how is it in 100 years, or if you wanted to go ahead and choose a specific time frame, then you could take a look across scenarios, what the comparison might be given a robust kind of selection of different climate futures. Asset details, you can go ahead and take a look at a little more of under each asset. But here, while the color scheme and kind of the graphical interpretation of this really is nice to be able to say, okay, I should really be looking at asset 3 as opposed to asset 2. We really want to be able to give you that quantitative, those quantitative values that are underlying those graphics. And for those of you wondering, okay, well, what does 3.5 mean? All of this is provided in all of the scales are provided in the index documentation right up here in the right-hand corner to say, okay, we've taken Munich Re's, return periods, and if they've been indexed, we show you how they've been indexed and how those risk scales are turned into an index, and then how that index is mapped onto the color scheme to allow you a 1 through 5, just kind of quick identification scheme. So all of that is made extremely transparent, and how you should go ahead and use that color mapping, and then what those means in terms of the underlying exposure quantifications. I do want to pass it back over to Jürgen here and have him talk a little bit about, especially for the forward-looking climate scores, climate models, that have to run 100 years into the future are rather granular. And when I say granular, I mean that they cover they have to cover the entire globe, and it would be quite computationally expensive to go ahead and model that at a super resolved, finely resolved spatial resolution. How do we go ahead and solve that problem? How has Munich Re handled that?
Thank you, Eric, for this question. And let me explain how to start with our climate modeling approach. And this approach, as you mentioned, is strictly based on the climate change framework established by the IPCC. So we follow strictly the recommendations from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, because this is a huge or global network of scientific people working on this so-called IPCC assessment reports, and our climate layers are based on the latest IPCC report AR5 from 2014. So let me start with the current parameters or the current climate scores. For this, we used the AR5 global models with 25-kilometer resolution, and these are observed data, and the technique behind is to do a reanalysis modeling. So for this backward looking, we use this ERA5 data sets, and for the projections, for the climate projections, for the acute and for the chronic, or more for the chronic layers, we use the Cortex, so-called Cortex data with 25 to 50-kilometer resolution, and where no Cortex data are available, we use the CMAP5 data, and this data has a 200-kilometer resolution. And these data are available or provided by this IPCC community, and it's terabytes of data, and you can download this data, and the work is to model or to remodel this data. And we modeled global data sets for these major scenarios: the 2.6 RCP scenario, the 4.5, the medium strong RCP scenario, and the worst case scenario 8.5. So these three scenarios, we provide chronic and acute parameters on a global base. Okay, just a few words to the chronic hazards. And as I mentioned, we modeled the chronic hazards based on this Cortex and CMAP5 data, but we decide it's complicated to provide, let's say, 7 or 5 heat parameters. So we decided to group that together in one heat stress index. So that means, in the heat stress index, we modeled the day's heat wave, for example, annual maximum temperature, annual mean daily temperature, days above 40 degrees, and so on. So, you can use this index. We have decided for a scaling from 0 to 10, and you can directly compare this index with the other ones that we provide: fire weather, for example, drought, or heavy precipitation. So these are the main indices to do an evaluation on a property or a single risk base. So I think this is important to know, that for the chronic climate hazards, we built this index, but behind, if you need the underlying real data, we can also provide this data, but this is a huge data set, and you have to work a lot, do a lot of data work to bring that into a form that you can analyze it. So for you, I think to do a risk assessment is an index is quite easy to apply and easy to understand.
Thanks, Jürgen. And there are a couple of things in that I want to highlight. The first, that for different risk factors, we provide different resolutions of data. So for flood, it's extremely important that Munich Re provides this resolutions on a 30 meter by 30 meter basis, because based on the elevation data, my building could be on one side of the street and be completely dry, whereas my neighbor's building could be just on the other side of the street and be completely underwater, right? And so whereas for something like heat stress, 30 meter resolution kind of, belabors the point a bit. So it's okay that heat stress might be measured in on the order of kilometers as opposed to meters. So tailoring each risk factor and the data needs behind them to the context in which it operates is important. And so something that you should take into account. Also, the second thing that I wanted to kind of pick up on from what you were saying is each of these risk factors actually is a composite of a lot of different elements. So for instance, flood risk takes into account the kind of precipitation, where the precipitation falls in relation to, in relation to the river, where there's a lot of elevation data built in. There's protective, if there's river protection and kind of other flood risk protective measures in that on a national scale in that area, those are taken into account. And so there's a lot of different underlying data sets of varying resolutions that Munich Re has spent a long time trying to constructing into an understandable index. And again, all of this kind of methodology stuff is given in more detail in the underlying index documentation. For those who buy the data and go ahead and enter the platform, they'll be able to access that and understand a little bit more about each of the different elements within each of these risk factors. And so, I mean, that's something that GRESB strives for, is transparency. We want to make it easy, but also transparent so you know what you're getting. And if you wanted to use this in forward-looking analysis, these are kind of considerations that you need to take into account. So thanks for that, Jürgen. And yeah, so let's switch back over.
Before we move, Eric, I'm seeing a couple of questions showing up in the chat session, and I think Jürgen's pretty well positioned to answer some of these. So one of the questions here is, how do you generate flood risk at 30 meters while you're using CMIP5 data for 200 km resolution? So that was the question. And then the second one was somebody from the Netherlands talking about their flood risk, and they're pretty protected, and wanted to get some ideas to how you kind of look at the Netherlands.
Yeah, thank you for this question. And yeah, for the flood, it's a really complex topic. We decided to contract JBA. It's a flood modeling company in UK, and they providing global consistent flood maps with 30-meter resolution, and we contract, or we license the 100 and the 500-year return period for from JBA on a global scale. So that's correct. So the flood zoning system is independent from the CMAP or from the climate data. So the climate data are, let's say, we used, or you can use it for meteorological or yeah, in the atmospheric to model the atmospheric parameters, but for the flood we decided to contract a JBA. Second question, of course we use the same resolution for the Netherlands, but the Netherlands is highly protected by protections like dams, levees, water protection on buildings, and so on. And we have to take into account in our analysis to use the standard of protection for a building. So there is some information for the Netherlands, because I think there is the highest level of protection, and even for the US, but this is another important information that we can provide the standard of protection. It's not implemented today, but this is an option to use it in this tool as well.
Excellent. And then the last question here that's kind of themed into this is, how often is the data updated?
Depends.
Actually, the future stuff. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Now, if you look into the scientific world, IPCC announced the CMAP 6 data coming out maybe mid or end of next year. And if these data are available, of course, we have to remodel all our layers again. But we stored, or we have the routine is saved in a code. So we have to update the new data and run the code again, and we can process the global layers quite easily and very fast. But we follow this, let's say, updates coming out from the data provider, for CMAP5 or Cortex, and for flood. JBA, or the flood company, is working on a more country base. So these days they want to renew the flood data in Australia. So we follow that and we replace, if there is a new data set available, Australia. And if, for example, in the US is a next, or for Canada is the next update planned in the next year, so we will follow that. So not too often, because we want to avoid, it's clear to us, if you have used the scoring in your pricing and in your accumulation control, you can't change the scoring every year. So you have to declare or explain your assessment to the regulators, and for this we need a stable system.
Makes sense. Okay. All right, Eric, back to you. I hope I haven't bogged us down. I'm watching that we're
not at all. Hey, if we're answering questions, then that's absolutely fine. So let's move back here. Okay, so moving on to kind of part 3, product specifications. First point is that come November, or when, as GRESB releases our results for the 2020 reporting season, that's when, we will have basically run our algorithms on this side and produced peer groupings for all portfolio types. And what that allows us to do is, because we've kind of embedded Munich Re's data into the GRESB platform, it allows us to benchmark your portfolios against the risk exposures of the average risk exposures for each type of risk to a like portfolio or a peer group portfolio. And so, this will help you go ahead and kind of do comparative analysis. If you're in a location where you're seeing that the asset that you have of that building type and of that region is well above the average for a similar property type, then that's something that you might want to consider taking a look at the other assets in there. Of course, this is a benchmark, so you'll have to do that homework by yourself. But at least it will give you a place to start. We've kind of already gone over asset selection and how we've tried to make that as flexible as possible for the user. One of those elements is the fact that you can actually insert the locations where you don't necessarily have assets yet. So you can create an entity and go ahead and input an asset name and an asset location. We'll geocode it for you. And then make that available for purchase almost instantaneously. And so if you want, you can go ahead and you have a handful of locations that you want to scope out, put those into an entity, make an order, and yes, you can use this for due diligence purposes. Once you buy the data, it's yours. You'll be able to go ahead and download a CSV or an Excel, and go ahead and, this is important. We've had a lot of our participant members interested in, we'd really like to overlay another kind of weighting of, in terms of gross asset value, because we know the gross asset values of all of our assets, and we want to be able to kind of do some additional analysis. You would just export the data, go ahead and create another column, type in your gross asset values for each of the assets, and then analyze to your heart's content. And then and pricing. So I know you'll all be excited about this. Before I switch to the next page and lose all of your attentions, we'll just explain kind of the basic pricing scheme first. And so the first asset you buy is going to be at around €600. And then as you buy more and more assets, the price per asset will decrease as you kind of reach different numbers of assets. And so the average for a larger portfolio, the average asset price will be lower than if the average asset price for a smaller portfolio. So let's just go to that really quickly. This is the asset selection page. And so here we have that pricing scheme made transparent for you all. So you can see, so for the first 10 assets that you kind of purchase in a single order would be priced, the data would be priced at €600 per asset. And then as you move to the next 40 assets, this would be the price. As you move to the next 150 assets, this would be the price per asset, etc. Again, here's how you can go and select. You can filter by property type. You can filter by country. You can mix and match however you see, however you like. And this will be updated in real time to make sure that you know what the price tag is before you're clicking the confirm button. Now we're aware that for some particularly large funds that the price tag can get rather large. In that case, you know, I encourage you to reach out to Dan, Neil, or whoever your regional head in that area is, to go ahead and start a conversation about how we can go ahead and make this best for you. Did I cover everything here, Dan, or?
I think you did great, right? So, you know, for the folks on the phone, just ping me and we'll help navigate.
Great. And with that, yeah, let's dive into some more questions. And you know, with the number of attendees we have on the call today and the number of questions we're getting, we may not be able to make it through them all. In that case, we will save all the questions, and we're going to make sure that we go ahead and try and answer all of them.
Eric, let's see if we can get to the first one, right? Let's try the one on the top, right? So, you know, this is focused on physical risk. What about the transition risk side of the equation? And this is a GRESB specific question.
Yeah,
what are we thinking about there?
Exactly. So GRESB is a member of what's called the CREM Consortium. So the CREM project is the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor. Some of the attendees may know about this. Essentially, it breaks down in a science-based methodology high-level Paris goals and the carbon budgets associated with those temperature targets into building-specific and region-specific intensity pathways. So you can go ahead and kind of map the performance of your particular asset against a kind of science-based, Paris-aligned target. And what this allows you to do is like, it's basically insofar as you believe that that downscaling methodology is representative of the regulations that could take place in that particular region, then that could be a proxy for transition risk and whether your asset will be kind of you know, unable to perform at the level that it has its license to operate, or may lose tenants or things like this. So we are working on building the CREM pathways into the GRESB portal and making sure that, you know, our managers can go ahead and do that type of analysis on their assets and on their portfolios. And we're hoping that will be available come the output season later on this year.
Perfect. Okay, so there's another question. It's kind of a broad question. I don't know exactly how to take this, but maybe Jürgen, you can help, right? So the question is pretty simple. What factors are involved in each scenario? I thought I heard IPCC, but can you, what factors are involved in each scenario? Can you give a succinct answer to this question? Because I can't.
Which factor? I'm not sure if I really get the question.
Okay, so if Lauren, yeah, go ahead. Or if Lauren, you're on the line.
No, it's not. So each of those hazards or chronic stresses. You can call them a risk factor.
Okay.
So what factors are involved in each scenario? And the simple question to this is essentially we make this completely transparent. Actually, on the landing page within the GRESB portal, you can click on data specifications, and for every single risk factor, you have what scenarios are provided, you have what timeframes are provided for that risk factor, and you have the resolution for that factor as well. So with these 3 points, you can make a decision about whether because we don't want to have someone say, we were really looking forward to having a tsunami risk rating for the year 2100 in RCP 8.6. Maybe we didn't run that analysis because tsunami risk for 2100 is maybe not the most relevant. But we wouldn't want you to buy data and understand that, oh, actually that's not available. So it's all transparent. Have a look at the in the portal, and all of those are made readily available for you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.
Okay, good job, Eric. I want to answer this last question that came in because it's an important one. Is the climate risk platform going to be incorporated into an assets GRESB score in the future? A very succinct answer. Well, no, let me just take it, right? No, right? So what this is an add-on, it's appendage. And my comment to lead off, right? A GRESB's mission and role is to help advance the industry. And Munich Re has a great data set that we believe is very valuable, or can be valuable from a risk management standpoint to our participants. So what we did is we put together this offering, but it is not part of the GRESB assessment. It doesn't replace or mimic or replicate the resilience module, and it's not part of any scoring, right? This is an additional thing that we think will be useful to the people in the institutional real estate industry to help them better understand physical risk forward on climate. Eric, anything else, or did I forget anything?
No, you got it.
Okay. All right. Perhaps the question above it, is the climate risk tool meant to be used on an ongoing basis? All right. So again, it seems like we're weaving in the idea of the GRESB submission. Again, this is what can you do with your data after a GRESB submission is the purpose of this. Eric, are you seeing this question? Or because there's like 3 questions in here.
There's tons of them, so I haven't scrolled.
No, it's the last one.
But yeah, the platform is open all year long. You can go in. Suppose you come across an asset location you want to go ahead and do due diligence on. Go right into the portal, and no matter what time, it doesn't matter if it's before submission, after submission. Yeah, it's meant to be available when you need it.
And then the question above that from Emily, will the owners of the asset, right? It's only the owners of the asset that can order this, right? This isn't available to institutional investors. It's available to the participants who know their assets and are interested in a better risk profile. So there's no, our portal is set up for this access request thing. That's not happening here. This is merely for the participants to use if they choose. Eric, other thoughts to bring forward here as I review some of these other questions?
I mean, we could just start going down the line, but
yeah, go for it.
We're okay. Yeah, we'll get through as many of them as we can. Okay. Let's see. Is there any plan to include risks from wildfire smoke in addition to, or rather than the risks from being caught in a wildfire itself? The air quality challenge has already been experienced in our portfolio. Okay. So I guess for downstream locations from potential wildfires or downwind locations. To my knowledge, that is not what the fire weather index currently measures. So no, it doesn't have kind of.
Yeah, let me explain in one sentence.
I'm not sure of any data that actually does that. Jürgen, go ahead.
Yeah, the fire weather index is let's say, a result from evapotranspiration and what ingredients from the atmospheric, and the wildfire hazard layer is also combining this and fuel what is on the ground, and is it forests or is it the urban interface. And so the wildfire layer is something different than the fire weather index. The fire weather index gives you an indication, is there a, let's say, increasing situation for wildfire, and in combination with the fuel that is available on ground, then you can say, okay, there is a higher wildfire risk or not. And we are currently working on a wildfire high resolution for most exposed West states, California, Colorado, and Arizona, and in Canada, and we will fill these entire or these countries. But this is a, let's say, enormous work to fit all these things together and develop wildfire HD maps.
Yeah, so just to put it together, I mean,
Yeah.
Smoke is an issue which we know and which we have some scores for. I guess, Eric, this is something which we might discuss to include or not in a future discussion. Okay.
Yeah, if this is an important risk factor that people want data on, then we can definitely consider that.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a couple more questions here before we run out of time. Would it be possible to review physical risk for REITs which do not currently report to GRESB? Would this include asset level granularity? So anyone can go ahead and create a GRESB account and enter the portal. So yes, if you have all of the locations for your assets, go ahead and enter the GRESB portal. You don't have to submit an assessment. But you can go ahead and use this tool, and yes, it will have the same granularity as any other manager using the tool. Let's see. Okay, so this one says, are the results statistical in a similar fashion? For example, a yellow score means the same global risk, or is it an absolute? Or is it more absolute as a score? So the color coding is mapped not based off of the distribution of assets with particular positions relative to each other. So I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but they are mapped to the risk specific return periods that Munich Re has underneath. And so, while a red dot is good for identifying within a particular risk, which ones are more or less you should be looking at, I wouldn't necessarily go ahead and say, okay, a red drought exposure is more material to me than an orange hurricane exposure. Both of those have different scales, and both of those have different return periods, mappings. So all of those mappings, again, are made transparent, and those methodological considerations are made transparent in the documentation. And so, yeah, we make that as clear as possible. It is more absolute than it is relative.
Perfect. Okay, so Eric, we're at the top of the hour. I'd like to turn to the Munich Re folks, particularly the Sergey. And Sergey, can you leave us with some last words here as to your view of the product, the value to the folks that have tuned in here? I think we had well over 100 that participated today. Last words with you and Jürgen.
Well, Dan, you caught me off guard.
I'm sorry. I know. I didn't. So everybody, I didn't.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think Eric and Jürgen did a great job explaining this. I think some other questions I was seeing is this: we update this tool regularly. I mean, if there are significant changes, we update it. So I mean, the clients of GRESB might be assured that what is there is up to date. And you know, we're seeing a lot of players asking the same questions, asking how do I measure climate? How do I measure the impact of climate on my assets? And I think that the mixture of our know-how and the easy to use platform of GRESB is a very, very potent tool. That would be it from me.
Perfect. Jürgen?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I would be highly appreciated to learn more from your side how a building, because we look what is around the building, but for me it's also important to learn how resistant is a building, and to go in the next level to the resilience topic. I think some question goes in that direction. How resilient is the building against storm, water, or whatever? And this is the next level of risk assessment, to combine, let's say, hazard with resilience. And you can say, okay, this building is, let's say, on pillows and safe for sea level rise and so on. So this is my hope, to collaborate further and learn more from your expert side. Thank you.
Excellent. I think we'll do well. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Eric, well done with this, with our effort here. For those that are still with us, if you have questions or comments, you can reach out to myself, d.winters@gresb.com. You can also reach out to Neil Pegram in Canada, n.pegram@gresb.com. And thank you very much. Conquer your days, and thanks for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you.